Hi, this is Alan Gabonik again. If you took the time to look at the introduction to backyard birds, then now we'll start you on identifying common resident birds. For those of you that are already well into birding, maybe you just skipped that introduction part, and that's fine. You're more interested in just, hey, let's get on to looking at the birds that we can see in our yard. So here we go. We'll start with some common resident birds. I've listed 22 common resident birds here that we'll talk about. I don't know that you want to take time to write all these down. I suppose you can stop the video at this point if you want to do that, or you can just continue on as I'm going to do and just write down the names of the birds as we go through them. As I said in the previous video, we'll start with the American robin. Again, our standard size, 10 inches long. If we were to draw a line through the middle of the bird, and this is not exactly the middle because of the pose of the bird, but at any rate, if we drew a line like that, everything above the line would be called the upper sides of the bird. Everything below would be called the undersides, and you'll hear me use those terms from time to time. And then as you saw in that topography diagram, there's different parts of a bird. You know, every bird has a head and it's got legs and feet and tail and back and so on. The top of the head is called the crown. Every bird has a chin and a throat, just like you and I do. There's a breast, there's a belly or abdomen, there's a side, and the side of the bird that's above the legs is referred to as the flanks. And then in the wings, the primaries are the ones that are out farther. They're on the hand of the bird. Secondaries are in here. And then these are the feathers that sort of cover the base of the wing. They're called the scapulars. And again, you'll hear me use these in other terms as we go along. Now, the American robin is a good one to start with for identifying birds because it's probably one you're most familiar with, and you can compare all the other birds to it. Now, a lot of people say you've seen one robin, you've seen them all. Well, not exactly. You actually, at least in the breeding season, can probably tell males from females. And that's because they are slightly different. They differ in the color of the head. See how black the head is on the male versus just grayish on the female. And this is another topographical feature called a broken eye ring. If a ring of color goes completely around the eye, we call it an eye ring. But if it doesn't go all the way around like this, we call it a broken or incomplete eye ring. So American robins have a broken eye ring. The fact that the females look slightly different than the males refers to the fact that they are what we call dimorphic, slightly dimorphic. Now, if you remember your high school or college days, the prefix di means two. Morphic refers to morphology. Morphology is the appearance or the structure of something. So here we have two structures, two appearances. Just like we humans, we males and females, we can usually tell each other apart. We're dimorphic as far as sex is concerned. So here, dimorphic means the male and the female look slightly different. Now, if the male and the female look the same, we use the term monomorphic, mono meaning one, and you'll see that term spelled out in some later slides. So at any rate, during the breeding season, you can identify the male and the female because of the difference of the color in the head. Now, when you're learning to identify birds, it's also useful to learn how to identify the offspring, the young birds. When the birds leave the nest, we call them a fledgling. We say they fledged from the nest. And we call them a fledgling and eventually a juvenile or an immature. So this is a juvenile or immature American robin, same size, 10 inches, but look at all the spots all over it. It looks different than the adults, and it will hold on to this plumage until later in the summer. And sometimes they can look so spotted that they actually look like a different bird. And I've occasionally had people call me at my office and ask me what this bird was because, you know, you're not used to seeing robins with spots all over them. You have to remember that this is the young bird, the baby bird, if you want to call it that, or maybe by now a teenage bird. So learn to recognize the offspring of the birds too. Now, word of caution. I talked about how males have got the darker head, females lighter head. Well, once those juveniles bolt into their late summer plumage, their first winter plumage, the birds will flock up after the breeding season. And I'll get these large flocks of robins in my yard here in this. Told you you'd see the new fountain. Here it is. I've got 13 American robins around the bird bath and up on the fountain. And you take a close look at them and whoa, are they all females? Not necessarily. When those juveniles molt into their first plumage, whether it's a male or a female, they look like females. So this picture, which was taken in December, I'm afraid I couldn't tell you whether that's a female or if it's just a one of those juveniles that's molted into his first winter plumage. So keep that in mind. That dimorphic distinction occurs primarily during the breeding season. All right, let's move on to another bird, probably the most hated bird in America, the European starling. These guys, well, they're black, right? That's what you think of when you think of starling, a black bird with a long pointed black beak, all right? These guys were introduced into Central Park in New York back in 1890 and 1891. There were about 100 or 120 of them total. Since then, they have spread all over North America and up into Canada, estimated population of over 20 million by now. They cause all kinds of agricultural damage, millions of dollars of damage to crops and so on. And they seem to be monomorphic, okay? Mono meaning one. In the wintertime, yes, I would say they're pretty much monomorphic. Notice 8.5 inches, they're a little bit smaller than a robin. But as I say, you think of them as being a blackbird, but look at, it's actually iridescent. Look at that beautiful sheen on it, the greenish and purplish color, almost a little bit of yellow. I was out doing a presentation to birds earlier this year, and we have these museum skins of birds that we hand out to kids to look at and touch and look at. And I was surprised. 2 girls came up to me with a skin of a starling in their hand, a specimen. And both of them said, "This is my favorite bird because it is so pretty." How many of us actually think of starlings as pretty? Well, at any rate, I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder, as they say. But starlings can look different at different times of the year. Once they're finished breeding, they will molt into a new plumage in the fall. So they got a fall and winter plumage, and notice all the white spots. It's a heavily spotted bird. Most of us don't think of starlings as being filled with white spots like this, but that's the way they are in the fall and the winter. And the bill is black. As you get into late winter and early spring, the longer days, advancing longer days of spring, kick on the reproductive system of just about all birds, at least north temperate birds. And that gets the reproductive system to put out the reproductive hormones. And that stimulates the reproductive organs to get larger so the birds can breed. Well, those hormones in the starling, they cause the beak to start turning yellow, as you can see here. So in late winter, early spring, you'll see what we call a bicolored bill, partly yellow, partly black. And eventually the bill becomes completely yellow by the time the bird is ready to breed. So now you know the bird is in breeding condition, yellow bill. Notice how black this bird looks now? That's what you think of when you think of a starling, but here's a black bird with a yellow bill. All these white spots are mostly gone by the time we get to the breeding season. Not because the bird molted, but because due to wear and tear, the white tips just wear off due to wear, getting, bumped up against branches and stuff like that. So it's really just a loss of white spots that makes the birds look yellow by the time they get to makes them look black by the time we get to the breeding season. When they do get to the breeding season, then we say they're slightly dimorphic. Look at the base of the beak. If it's pink, it's probably a female. If the base of the beak is blue, it's probably a male. So, pink for girls, blue for boys, just like we humans. It's a very subtle difference, but that makes them slightly dimorphic during the breeding season. And then, as with the robin, you need to recognize the juvenile after it fledges from the nest. This is what the juvenile looks like by the time they're getting ready to molt into their first adult plumage. They're just overall brownish. See that? With a kind of a thick black bill. Notice this guy is starting to get some black feathers coming in. There's another juvenile taking a bath down there on top of my fountain. If you see them when they first come out of the nest, when they first fledge, man, you have no idea what these things are. They just look like a charcoal ball of fuzz, so to speak. But if you see an adult starling feeding one, then you know that is a fledgling starling. But if one of those birds is sitting up in a bush somewhere in your yard, you look at it, smaller size, you have no idea what that thing is. So you have to learn to recognize that that is a starling fledgling. And again, here's what the juvenile starling looks like compared to the adult starling that's in breeding condition here. And base of the bill, what do you think? I would say that's a boy. Notice this guy is starting to molt into adult black plumage. You can even see some white spots coming in at the tips of some of the new winter plumage, winter feathers. Okay, moving on. Most of us in our houses usually have this house sparrow, also called the English sparrow. Considerably smaller, 6¼ inches, called the English sparrow because these two were brought over from England in the various parts of the 1800s. Thought they would be great for trying to control various agricultural insects. Turns out they love to eat grain and seed, and so they would go out there and eat all the grain and seed in the cattle droppings and horse droppings in the 1800s, and they too have spread all over North America. They are strongly dimorphic, easy to tell male from female. Here's the male house sparrow. Really kind of a pretty bird if you take a close look at it. They have this black cone-shaped bill, which we call a conical bill, black on the chin and throat, some black on the breast area, which we refer to as a bib. They've got this white thing going across the wings. We call that a wing bar. And notice that no markings on the rest of the underside. We call that a clean or clear underside, or unmarked, unstreaked undersides. Okay, so that's the male. This is the female, very different. Just a little brown job, LBJ, little brown jobby. But notice, again, unstreaked on the undersides, all clean chin, throat, breast, and belly. But up here, there is a line that goes above the eye. We call that an eyebrow. Or if you want to impress your friends, use the formal term, it's called the supercilium, the supercilium. And then there's a line that goes through the eye. That is called an eye line. This one looks like it has kind of a faint wing bar too. Notice, remember the male had dark black beak. The females have this kind of orangish to yellowish on the lower mandible, sometimes also on the upper mandible, but sometimes the upper mandible turns brown or black. Here's another look at the back. There's a good look at the eyebrow or supercilium, and there is the eye line going through the eye. And then there is the orangish beak. Notice on the back, the pattern is kind of brownish and orangish, streaks and stripes and spots and so on. So, strongly dimorphic male house sparrow up here, 2 female house sparrows down here. Okay, if we were in the visitor center and I was talking to you live, I'd say, tell me what these birds are. Since you can't do it, might as well do it myself, I guess. Back here, this obviously is a male. See the black chin and throat. There's the black that goes back up around the eye, and then that chestnut that sweeps back behind the eye, and then that kind of bluish on the head. This one's got a wing bar. That's a wing bar. That kind of looks like a part of a wing bar, and that looks like one too. So this one, I'm guessing, is a female. See, that looks like that supercilium that I told you about. This kind of tan-colored eyebrow. This guy, I'm calling it a guy because see how black it looks here? That looks like a black beak to me, and that black going up around the eye. Same thing here. I think that's a male. This one, I can't tell. But let's go back and take a look at that male again. See, what I'm looking at is the black beak and black chin and throat. But remember, there's this black that goes up around the eye too and surrounds the eye. So I think looking at these guys, see how black that looks there, and that looks like an eye. So I think these two are males. But you know what? Sometimes you can't tell. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. In fact, it's often better to say, I don't know, than to misidentify a bird. Sometimes you just have to wait till the bird moves or gets into a different pose. So now, for example, look, this one moved. Now it's obvious this is a male house sparrow. There's the bluish gray on the crown and back on the back of the neck. There's that black around the eye and so on, the white wing bar. This one now looks even more like a female. See, there's that tan supercilium. And this guy is obviously a male now that he's turned and looking at us. These two, well, I still think they're males. I'm just going to have to wait until they move so I get a better look at them. You can also tell fledgling house sparrows if you catch them at the right time. Fledgling songbirds, when they come out of the nest for the first few days or maybe in a week or so, they have this little fleshy gape, we call it, at the base of the beak. So if you see that on one of the birds in your yard, you know that that is a fledgling that had just recently left the nest. And so when the fledgling house sparrows come out, whether it's a male or a female, they look like females. Can't tell sex apart at that point. Okay, moving on, if you've got house sparrows around your house, you probably also have this guy, the house finch. Over in England, they call it the linnet. It's another brown bird, but some pretty colors on it. It's got red on what we call the forehead, red going across the eye and basically kind of like a supercilium. It's got this reddish on the chin and throat, partly of the face, coming down across the breast, almost to the belly. It's got streaks along the undersides here and along the flanks. And the posterior third of the back is referred to as the rump. So the male house finch also has this reddish color on the rump. About 6 inches long, so about the same size as the house sparrow. Here's another look at several males so you can see the coloration on them. There's that rump again. Notice the head is usually brown. A lot of people say the house finch has a red head. No, it doesn't. It has red on the forehead and extending along as a supercilium, and the crown and neck is usually brownish. Now, in some birds, you can see it looks like the red color is starting to extend onto the crown, but that's still really more brown than it is red. That's not a fully red head. This one too, forehead and above the eye, and then extending all the way down onto the upper part of the belly. And then look at all the streaks. Here's the female, very different. Just nondescript LBJ, little brown jobby. She has a conical bill, curved at the top, all this heavy streaking on the undersides. Here's a male and a female at my hopper feeder. Male on the right, easy to recognize. Female on the left. How do I recognize it as a house finch? Well, that curved upper mandible that I pointed out, and all this streaking along the breast, belly, and the flanks, and so on. So, house finch, dimorphic. Now, sometimes people ask me, well, how the heck can I tell this little LBJ, the house finch, from this other LBJ, the house sparrow? Well, a couple of easy ways. Easiest way is look at all the streaks on the house finch. House sparrows don't have the streaks, remember? All clear on the ends, on the underside. And then the color of the beak, remember? House finches have got black beaks. House sparrows have got that orange on at least the lower mandible. Another thing to recognize is that orangish stuff I mentioned on the back of the female. These orangish streaks and so on. That will also separate you from the house finch female, because the female house finch doesn't have that orangish on the back. So at least 2 easy ways to tell a female house finch from a female house sparrow. Don't worry about this guy, the white-crowned sparrow. We'll talk about him later when I do winter birds. Now keep in mind that not all house finches have that red color. There's color variations in the population. Some individuals are not as brightly colored. Others look like they tend more towards orange and yellow and so on. Here's a house finch that's mostly yellowish next to a male house sparrow. And here's one in my front yard that's really yellow, okay? No one seems to know for sure what causes this color variation. Some people think that it may be due to the diet, that if the bird isn't getting certain nutrients in its diet, it doesn't have the proper nutrients to metabolize the dark red pigment. Other people have thought it might be due to what we call parasite load, that if there's a lot of parasites inside the bird, that weakens the bird, and it doesn't have the energy to carry out the metabolic reactions needed to make that dark red pigment. As far as I know, no one has come up with a final resolution, but then I haven't been keeping up with the literature, so I don't really know. All we know is that there's lots of color variation in the males in the house finch population. Okay, what do we got here? Well, that's obviously a male house finch, but what's this one compared to that one? Well, let's see, there's a bit of a wing bar. Oh my gosh, there is a, what do we call that? Supercilium, remember? And then an eyeline, and then sort of an orangish beak, unstreaked on the undersides. That looks like a female house sparrow. As far as this guy is concerned, there's no orange on the back, but remember, female house sparrows do have this orangish. So if you look at them again, here's the orangish on this female house sparrow that I showed you before. Can't see the back there, but there's the that tan supercilium and the black eyeline, which you can see here on this bird. Unstreaked undersides. This one doesn't have the orangish on the back. So these are two female house sparrows. And whoops, that one I'm calling a female house finch. Of course, it'd be nice if she'd turn around so I could see whether she's all streaked on the bottom, and that would help to clinch the identification. Another common bird that probably all of us have in our yards is the California quail. Easily recognized as male versus female, strongly dimorphic. The male has got this, what we call a kind of a bib here on the chin and throat, bordered by the white, a white line up here, bordered by black, and then kind of chestnut color up on the crown of the head. Both of them have what we call a top knot, but the top knot is bigger in the male than it is in the female. So I like to tell kids that, you know, in many birds, the males are more brightly colored than the females. And then I ask them, why so? Why are the males more brightly colored? And they eventually get around to saying it's because they're trying to attract the birds. And then I say, well, why are the females so dull colored? And we finally get around to talking about how they, since they're sitting on a nest on eggs, they need to be camouflaged. They need to blend into the background so predators can't find them. And so I always finish by saying, well, then it's a basic biological fact that boys are better looking than girls. And you can imagine what kind of looks and comments I get from the girls in the class. So I always put my life in my own hands when I say that. So lots of California quail in most people's yards. I get large numbers of them competing like this for food underneath the finch feeder in the wintertime. I can get sometimes 40, 50, 80 or so of them in my yard. Even in the spring and summer, they'll come under the other finch feeder and clean up any seeds that have fallen from the feeder. So very common resident here. Another common resident that most of you probably recognize is the mourning dove. And notice how it's spelled. It's not like morning, the time of or the day of the week. It's morning, meaning mournful, referring to the mournful call of its sound. Like it's mourning the loss of a lost one or something. Sorry, I'm sure that's a poor imitation, but I was just trying to get a point across. At any rate, 12 inches, a little bit bigger than a robin. Notice the color that goes all the way around the eye, so that is a true eye ring. They got the black spots on the upper part of the wing and the red feet and legs. They are basically monomorphic, can't tell male from female. Although I've read somewhere that at least during the breeding season, the males tend to get a little bit more iridescent on the back of the neck, but I honestly have never checked that out. So check that one out for me and let me know. When they fly, they have this pointed tail. You can see on this previous slide, look how pointed that tail is. And when they fly, that pointed tail shows you white outer tail feathers. It's kind of a V-shaped tail when they're flying. Okay? And I've always thought they had a kind of ridiculously small head for the body size, but nobody asked me to design the bird, all right? So that's the mourning dove, primarily ground feeders. So if you want to feed them, you feed them on the ground. If you don't want to put seeds on the ground, put out a platform feeder, some kind of a flat surface where you can spread the seeds and they can land on there and feed. And sometimes, even though I'm looking at them with a camera, they kind of like to look back at me and wonder what I'm doing. Mourning doves. But check the doves in your yard and in your neighborhood, because not all of the doves are mourning doves. Some of them are this guy, Eurasian collared dove, named for that collar that's on the back of the neck. Same size, 12.5 inches. These guys were released in the Bahamas in the 1970s. I guess there was a burglary in a pet shop and some of the birds escaped, and then eventually the owner released something, about 50 of them. Somehow they made it to Florida in the 1980s, southern Florida, I think, probably blown over by a storm. And since then, they have spread all across North America. Except for some reason, they haven't made it up into the northeastern part of the country. Don't know why, but at least they're out here now. And I can remember these guys showing up in my yard, I don't know, maybe about 5-6 years ago. They were nesting in a neighbor's yard, and now I get them every year. They keep coming to my hopper feeders and my bird bath and fountain every year. They're regular resident birds now. Notice, unlike the mourning dove, it's what we call a square cut tail, not pointed. So there's mourning doves with those pointed tails, and here's the collared dove with a square cut tail. And when they fly, easy to recognize them. There's the mourning dove again with that V-shaped pointed tail with the white outer tail feathers, whereas the collared dove has more of a fan shape, and we have what we call a terminal white band across the tail. Terminal refers to the end or the tip of the tail. They have a very different call too, which is easy to recognize, but unfortunately I can't do it. Or maybe fortunately for you, I can't even try to do it. Moving on, another common resident is the lesser goldfinch. Notice, very small, 4.5 inches. That's in the tiny category, even smaller than most sparrows. So if you've got a finch feeder out there, or one of those finch socks, you're putting what is called Niger seed in it. Some people mistakenly call it thistle seed. I know I used to for years until I was corrected. It's Niger seed, which actually comes from Africa. And easy to tell the male from female because they're dimorphic. The male has got this black cap, we call it, all across the crown and down the back of the neck. And then the rest of the body is this, I guess you call it what, olive greenish with some black streaks. The wings are black with white edges to them, and there's black tail with white spots in there. This is the female. Looks pretty much the same over the rest of the body, but she doesn't have the black cap. Okay, same size, 4.5 inches. So there's the male lesser goldfinch here on the left, female on the right. And if you put out a finch feeder, no matter what kind it is, there's several different kinds, you'll get a good variety of birds, or a good number of birds. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 goldfinches there, and I suspect that's a male house finch in the back. Easy to attract them. Now there's another goldfinch here in northern Nevada that you can also get called the American goldfinch, also strongly dimorphic. But notice the bright yellow on this one, yellow and contrasting black in the wings, black up on at least the first half of the head. Very easy to recognize from the lesser goldfinch, very distinctly different in the breeding season. But during the winter, it can be more difficult, and this is why I'm pointing out this. The undertail coverts of the American goldfinch, which are collectively called the chrism, again, impress your friends. Did you see that white chrism on that bird? Oh man, she really knows what she's talking about, doesn't she? White chrism on the American goldfinch, whereas in the lesser goldfinch, it's yellowish. Here's 2 more pictures of lesser goldfinches. Notice the yellow chrism on both of them. Now, here's a white chrism. So if you can only see part of the bird on your finch feeder, just a little bit of yellow, if you see the white chrism, you know it's an American goldfinch. But why bother with that if the male looks so different from the male lesser goldfinch? Well, here's the reason. In the wintertime, the male molts into a winter plumage and looks a lot like the female. And then it's hard to tell even males and females apart. So these are American goldfinches in winter plumage. 5 inches long, not much bigger than the lesser goldfinch, only about a 1/2 inch more. Another picture of two winter plumage American goldfinches. Notice the brownish coloration on them, and many of them tend to get this sort of yellowish here in the chin and throat, and sometimes around the face. But the rest of the bird, the black wings with white on them, black tail with white spots, same thing as the lesser goldfinch. But again, there's that white chrism. So now sometimes you get this in the middle of winter at your finch feeder. What in the heck? How are you going to tell what each of these birds is? Well, here's a hint. Remember I said American goldfinches, to me they look brownish on the back with maybe this whitish around the face. Lesser goldfinches sometimes they still look kind of bright yellow, or at least yellowish throughout the whole winter, and they've got the greenish look on the back, okay? So greenish versus brownish. And then the chrism, the yellow chrism versus white chrism on there. So let's go back to this one. All right, what do we have here? Well, this one obviously has got a black cap and greenish over here, yellow underneath. That's a male lesser goldfinch. Look how brown this one is. I'm calling this an American goldfinch in winter plumage. Brownish, white chrism, American goldfinch. Brownish, American goldfinch. Brownish, and there's that yellow on the face, American goldfinch. Yellowish on the face, chin and throat, brownish, American goldfinch. Another brownish one, American goldfinch. Another brownish one, yellow, American goldfinch. Let me see. That looks like a black cap, and although this bird is in the distance, that kind of looks greenish to me. I'm going to call this a male lesser goldfinch. Brownish again, American goldfinch. Brownish, American goldfinch. That looks yellowish underneath. And that looks kind of greenish. I'm thinking that's a female lesser goldfinch. Probably another American, probably another, oh, wait a minute. Yellowish, greenish. I think that's a lesser. And this one, notice how in the winter plumage, American goldfinches don't have a lot of yellow on the undersides, whereas the lesser goldfinches still do. So that's another way to keep them apart. So I'm calling that one an American there. I'm calling that one a lesser goldfinch. So that's the challenge in the wintertime when American and lesser goldfinches get together on the same finch feeder at the same time. Now, as you get into late winter and early spring, those male American goldfinches will start molting into their breeding plumage, that bright yellow plumage. And then you'll see them at your feeders looking like this. They look splotchy, like this. So that's a male American goldfinch in spring molt. And if you don't know that's what they look like in spring molt, you look out there and you see this bird in your yard and you wonder, what in the heck is this crazy bird? And you'll call me, or you'll call somebody else and say, got this funny looking bird in my yard that's got some yellow on the face and on the breast and over by the wing, but the rest of the bird is brownish. And the first thing I will say is, how big is it? 5 inches, okay? That narrows it down. And here we go. They're almost there. You can still see a little bit of the winter plumage in here, a little bit there and there. These are American goldfinches, almost in full breeding plumage. So 2 goldfinches you can get. And so at that time of the year when they're molting, it's easy to spot the males on the feeder. This is easy to spot a black-capped male lesser goldfinch. All this greenish, this is a female lesser goldfinch. But then you might have trouble with the females. See how brownish this is? That's a female American goldfinch. Lesser goldfinch because of the green. And there's a male American goldfinch molting. And of course, you already know what these others are. This one, and this one, and this one. What are they? LBJ with a lot of streaking on the undersides and a curved upper mandible. That's female house finch, of course. And then there's a male and another male house finch. Okay? See how easy it is? See how good you're getting? Okay, if we were in the visitor center, I would say, okay, raise your hands. How many of you saw a blue jay in your yard? And I would say that probably at least 50% of you would raise your hand. And I would have to say, well, you saw a blue jay, but unfortunately you did not see a blue jay. This is a blue jay. and it's an eastern bird. All the jays are monomorphic, can't tell male from female. But notice this, what we call a black necklace, whitish or grayish here, clear undersides, mostly whitish to grayish, and then this beautiful coloration with the white wing bar there. Here's the map that shows where they live. They are primarily an eastern and midwestern bird, east of the Rocky Mountains. So you don't expect to see blue jays out here in Nevada. Now, having said that, several decades ago, there was a blue jay, an actual blue jay, eastern blue jay, that came to somebody's feeder. And I think it was in either Fernley or Fallon, I forget which, for like 2 winters in a row. And then one year, the gal who was the secretary of our Audubon Society, she lives on University Terrace, and she knows birds. She had a eastern blue jay come to her feeder just west of the university campus on University Terrace. So you never know. Birds don't read the books. They just do what they want to do, and they go where they want to go. So never say never. I almost said you would never expect to see an eastern blue jay out here, but you would hardly ever expect to see an eastern blue jay out here. So there's the eastern blue jay, 11 inches long. Nice, beautiful pattern. They have a crest. When the feathers on the head stick up, we call that a crest. And notice they can drop the crest if they want. And just like any other bird, they love to take a bath in a bird bath. So that's the eastern blue jay. That's the formal name, the blue jay. Out here, we have 4 blue jays. By that I mean blue colored jays, but none of them is an official blue jay. They have a different name. This is the California scrub jay, the one that you would most commonly see in your yard, depending upon, of course, where your yard is and what your surrounding habitat is. California scrub jay, if you've got an older guidebook, it was formerly called the western scrub jay. But now that has been split into 2 separate species, which I'll talk about in a few seconds. But the scrub jay, let's just say scrub jay in general, black beak, long bill, white supercilium or eyebrow, this kind of whitish or silverish coming down from the chin, throat, and onto the breast. There is what they call a breast bar coming down onto the breast from the back, bluish in color. This grayish coloration on the back with the rest of the wing and the back being blue, and then this tail. If you want to have fun, put out a peanut feeder and watch the scrub jays come in. Pick at the peanuts, pick them up, don't like one, drop it, grab another one, don't like it, drop it, grab another one, fly off with it. So here's the characteristics again. Black around the ear area, which we call the auricular area, the white supercilium, the blue all over the head and the beginning of the back, black across, or grayish across the back. Notice how long that tail is. That tail is almost as long as the entire body. Love to eat peanuts. But that western scrub jay is now broken or divided up into 2, the California scrub jay and the woodhouse scrub jay, both 11 inches long. Why do I bother to tell you about the 2 of them? Because of where they occur. California scrub jay, as you would probably assume, occurs in California and up the coast, but notice it also comes down into our area. The woodhouse scrub jay is primarily in the interior southwest, like this, down into Mexico, but notice it also gets over here into the Reno area. So depending upon where you are in Reno, Sparks, Carson City, or south, you've got a chance of seeing either woodhouse scrub jay or California scrub jay. So it helps to learn how to tell them apart. The California scrub jay is seemed to have, it's been described as having a deeper blue across the body and the breastband and on the wings and tail, whereas the woodhouse scrub jay tends to be lighter, more paler blue. Blacker in the face here on the California, a little bit light gray on the woodhouses. And then the undersides of the woodhouses is supposed to be grayish, whereas under the California, it's more whitish, lighter in color, okay? So darker blue, lighter undersides. Paler blue, darker undersides versus the 2. And supposedly, the California scrub jay has a thick bill, thicker than the woodhouses. And man, if you can tell that in the field, you're a better birder than me, which probably isn't saying much anyway. So at any rate, those are the 2. I'm going to call these California scrub jays because so far that's about all I've been able to really identify in my yard, the California scrub jay. So here they are picking out peanuts, and they'll take those peanuts and they'll dig a hole and they'll cache them in the ground, and then they'll come back and dig them up and eat them later. Unfortunately for this bird, whenever he buried any in my yard, my dogs would eventually come out and dig them all up and eat them. So, and they have to be careful that when they're digging that hole and caching it, they look around to be sure there are no other jays around, because jays have been known to watch somebody else cache, come on over and steal their food in the cache. So those are two of our blue jays in Nevada. Here's a third blue colored jay, the Steller's jay. Notice the big difference here, the crest. The Steller's jay is the only jay with a crest out west. Back east, it's the blue jay with a crest, but out here, it's the Steller's jay. And again, they can raise it up or they can drop it. So the crest and the face look black. The black extends partway down the back. The rest of it is this nice blue. The tail is shorter in relation to the body than in the scrub jay. Notice it's bluish on the bottom too, unlike the scrub jay. This is the bird that people refer to as the bird of the Tahoe Basin, because you often see it up in the mountains there, in and around Tahoe and Ponderosa pine forest and so on. The forehead can have blue feathers like that. Some populations it's whitish, but notice how overall blue the bird is, except for the blackish on the head and the back. Monomorphic, like all jays, can't tell male from female. There's no distinguishing marks on the wings at all, other than the fact that the veins of the wings are grayish as opposed to the rest of the wing being blue. And so there is the scrub jay compared to the Steller's jay. I think it's very easy to tell them apart, isn't it? Steller's jay about a ½ inch larger than the scrub jay. And so these are our two Nevada bluish jays compared to the eastern blue jay back east. Very different birds. And then here is our fourth blue jay in Nevada. And I have never gotten any photos of these. I don't live in a proper habitat around me to get these birds. As the name implies, they're found primarily in pinon pine forest or mixed pinon juniper forest. I've heard them a mile or two from my house with the raucous calls, but I've never gotten one in my yard. I know friends that have these coming into their yard all the time because they live near a pinon pine or a juniper forest. So someday I'm hoping to maybe go and get some photos. But right now I have to rely on these pictures from a guidebook. Notice blue all over. None of that black on the back, none of the black on the head. They're just blue all over with a relatively short tail and maybe some whitish or grayish in the chin and throat. So here it is compared to the scrub jay and the Steller's jay. These guys, when they walk, they kind of strut like a crow. They're very gregarious, often found in flocks. In fact, they even breed in colonies. And so the way that they walk, often referred to as the little blue crow, because they kind of walk like a crow. So there's three of the four Nevada's blue jays, none of which is a true blue jay. Got it? Okay, relative of the blue jay and the so-called corvid family, relative of the jays period, is the black-billed magpie. So if you live anywhere near open area or along say a stream where there's a lot of cottonwoods and so on, you might get this guy. Easily recognizable by the black and white pattern and that long black tail. When it flies, you see some white out there on the primaries of the wing, along with the white on the belly. And although it looks black and white from a distance, it's actually iridescent, kind of like a starling. The light hits it right, you can get this bluish sheen, sometimes a greenish sheen and so on. Look at this one. Look at how, instead of looking black, really long bluish tail, bluish on the wings and so on. Really, really a pretty bird. They build this big bulky nest of sticks, usually up in the tall cottonwood and so on. There you can see a magpie coming out of the nest and flying off. So if you're anywhere near open areas that have got some nice cottonwood, you're liable to get magpies nesting nearby and coming to your yard. Another very, very common resident bird here is the Brewer's Blackbird, named for the fact that it looks black all over. The distinguishing feature, well, of course, like all blackbirds, it's got this long pointed bill. but the distinguishing feature of the male is that bright yellow eye. But even that is iridescent, not the eye, the bird, that is. You see some iridescent purple and greenish here and down in the tail and so on. Easily recognizable, 9 inches, so it's just a little bit smaller than a robin. And again, look at the purple and the greenish and so on that shows up with the iridescence, but you don't get the proper angle of light, it just looks all black. Females, same size, but they're gold brown. And they don't have the yellow eye, they've got a dark eye like that. But even they can be iridescent. Notice how the light hits it and makes it look kind of shiny greenish. So here, female on the left, male on the right. Notice how pale this one looks, but that long, pointed blackbird bill. Another blackbird, common here all year round, especially if you live anywhere near wetlands, marshlands, and so on. The red-winged blackbird, named for obvious reasons. Now look at how pointed that beak is on this guy. Black all over, except for on the shoulder, this red bordered by yellow. We call that an epaulet. You know, like the epaulets that like generals have on the shoulders of their uniforms and so on. That's how it got the name epaulet. Strongly dimorphic, there's the female. The female just looks like a large sparrow, you know. Instead of 5 inches, it's 8 3/4 inches, but it looks like a brownish sparrow. Lots of heavy streaking on the undersides. There is an eyebrow and an eye line, and then there's a stripe here. That's referred to as a malar stripe, M-A-L-A-R, and I'll show you some malar stripes and some other birds. But there's the male red-winged blackbird. You often see them on top of a cattail or a tall reed like this singing. Females usually are down deep in the cattails, tending to the nest and the young, and you don't see them as often as you do the males. When a male's coming at you, it's like 2 red headlights coming at you. But be advised, particularly the first year red-winged blackbirds, the young males, they can hide that epaulet. These upper feathers can cover the red and the yellow. And you look at this black bird and you say, oh, it's a Brewer's blackbird. Is it? Compare it to a Brewer's blackbird. Brewer's blackbird has the yellow eye, remember? So if you see a bird like this, that's all black, not brownish, but blackish, with a dark eye, that's probably maybe a first-year red-winged blackbird, just covering up the epaulet. Again, if you live anywhere where you're surrounded by open meadows, open shrubland, and so on, you're liable to get these guys, the western meadowlark. 9.5 inches long, so almost as big as a robin. Easy to recognize with all that yellow on the undersides, chin, throat, down to the breast and belly and so on. And then this brownish to blackish V on the breast. Notice there is a white supercilium. They've got a short tail. Notice the upper sides are all this kind of brownish, spotted, streaky, barred area. That's because these guys are ground feeders and they nest on the ground. And this is basically camouflage coloration. So it makes it harder for a predator to see them when they're down there on the ground with this coloration that blends into the background. There's a white median line on the head, and then there's those 2 eyebrows that I told you about. Short, stubby tail. And it's easy to recognize them as they fly away because the tail is so short and the outer tail feathers are white. There's the white supercilium. Notice the front of it is yellow. This area between the eye and the beak is called the lore, L-O-R-E. I should have labeled it, sorry. So they got a yellow lore that bends back into a white supercilium. But as they fly away, it's the short stubby tail and those white outer tail feathers that tell you it's a western meadowlark. And look at that beak there, that tip. That is so good for digging in the ground and looking for insects and other food items. Now we do have some woodpeckers that are here all year round, and this is the largest of our local woodpeckers, the northern flicker, 12.5 inches long. Now, this is a male. You can tell the male because it's got this reddish mustache, we call it, or malar stripe, uh, barring across the back and the wings and so on, spots on the undersides. There's a black little triangle there called a chevron. But this is a woodpecker. What's it doing down on the ground? You expect woodpeckers to be up in trees, right? Well, northern flicker, one of its favorite foods is ants. So it's often down in the ground, burrowing into the ground, digging in the ground to find ants. Like this guy one year, well, I couldn't tell if it's a guy or a gal at this point, down in the snowbank in front of my house, just digging away like crazy. Finally brought its head up with whatever it was digging up there. And now I could tell it was a male because of the red mustache. These guys will also come to your suet feeders. Again, you see all the markings, the barring on the back, the spots along the side and the belly. But there's the male mark, the malar stripe, or mustache as we call it. So most woodpeckers, maybe all woodpeckers, I guess, are slightly dimorphic. And so is the flicker. I'll show you the female in a minute. There's that black breast thing that we call a chevron. And again, look at all the spots here and all the bars. You can see why it's also known as the red shafted flicker. In the eastern United States, there's a northern flicker that is referred to as the yellow shafted flicker. It's just a subspecies of the northern flicker. But this one out here has got all the red on the shafts of the feathers, hence the name red shafted flicker. Woodpeckers have got protrusible tongues that they can stick out. With those heavy beaks of theirs, those long pointed beaks, they will dig holes in tree trunks and branches and so on, and then stick their tongue into that hole. It's got barbs at the end and sticky secretions, and they use that to trap insects and pull them back in. Here he's using it to trap some suet for my suet feeder and pull it back in. Notice the way he's holding the tail. Woodpeckers have got these very, very stiff tails, which they use to brace themselves against the substrate. In this case, the trunk of my birch tree, or perhaps a branch or whatever. This is the female. Notice I said slightly dimorphic. She looks pretty much the same in overall design as the male, but no mustache. So no mustache, it's a female. Red mustache, it's a male. Another thing I might point out is that most birds have got 3 toes forward and 1 toe back. But woodpeckers, I don't know how well you can see this here, to help them grip the surface better, the branches and the trunks, they've got 2 toes forward and 2 toes back. That gives them a better grip on the surface of the branch or trunk that they're on. This gal hadn't learned how to hang upside down at the time I took this picture, but there she was, hanging upside down and sticking her tongue into the suet. This is our smallest woodpecker here, the Downy Woodpecker. The Downy Woodpecker is small, 6 3/4 inches, so actually not much bigger than a sparrow, and black and white. Again, slightly dimorphic. The male has got this red on the back of the head. Back of the head and neck is referred to as the nape, so we said it's got red on the nape. Female does not. Clear undersides, no marks there, but notice all the white spots on the black wings and white back. Downy Woodpecker and the next one I'll show you, the hairy woodpecker, are the only 2 woodpeckers that have white backs out west. The only 2 woodpeckers with white backs. So black and white with white back. Notice the outer tail feathers on the Downy Woodpecker has got some black spots on it. Shows up here on this female and shows up here again on this male. That's important to help you recognize how to tell it apart from the larger hairy woodpecker. Here, the hairy woodpecker is almost 3 inches bigger, 9 1/4 inches. This is a female feeding a fledgling that came out of the nest. This is a male, again, the red on the back of the head, the nape, female without it. Black and white, just like a Downy Woodpecker, the white spots on the wings, so looks very much like the Downy Woodpecker, but it's larger. What did we have? 6 3/4 inches for the Downy, 9 1/4 inches for the hairy. Well, sometimes when you're out looking at birds from a distance, and I know I've had this happen to me, sometimes I find it hard to judge the actual size of the bird from a distance. You would think 6 3/4 versus 9 1/4 would be easy to tell them apart, but from a distance, sometimes I'm not too sure. So if you can't tell size and you can't see the tail feathers, check the bill length versus the head length. In the Downy woodpecker, it's a smaller beak. The beak is not as long as the length of the head. It's tinier. Whereas in the hairy woodpecker, that beak is a bigger, thicker beak, and it is basically as long as the length of the head. So if you can't see, or not sure the size, you can't see whether or not there's black spots on the outer tail feathers, check the beak length versus the head length. If you are, again, somewhere near a forest, you're liable to see this bird, the white-headed woodpecker, named for obvious reasons, the white on the head, and a white spot in an otherwise black wings and body. This is obviously a male with red on the nape again. Here's a female, no red on the nape. Whoops. And here's a male feeding young. All woodpeckers are cavity nesters. They all dig their own holes and use that beak, as I said, to dig out the hole and make the nest. So that's the white-headed woodpecker. Very, very handsome bird. Now, if you've got feeders in your yard and you do have birds around feeding, you're probably going to attract some predators. And one of the most common ones is a small falcon called the American Kestrel. It's probably the smallest falcon. Well, it is the smallest falcon in all of North America. Most hawks, and falcons are hawks, most hawks are monomorphic, but the kestrel is dimorphic. The male is more brightly colored than the female. There you get a better look at them. We tell the kestrel from its small size, 10.5 inches. See it there. Okay. Notice the face marks on it, on the side of the face. There's another look at it. Facial marks or malar stripes. This bluish gray on the forehead, extending along the side of the head. The top of the crown is sort of this chestnut color. We actually call this rufous. Rufous, R-U-F-O-U-S. Rufous meaning reddish brown. And then there's a rufous on the scapulars, spots on the undersides here. Notice bluish on the wing. These are the primaries and secondaries, okay? Bluish on the wing. There's the female. The face pattern and head looks the same as the male. Same size, but no blue on the wings. And that's really all you need to be able to tell male from female kestrel. Blue on the wings of the male, no blue on the wings of the female. Another predator, the one I get more commonly in my yard, is the Cooper's hawk. Now, the Cooper's hawk belongs to a group of hawks called the accipiters. Accipiters are hawks that have tails that are long and narrow with bars on them, and the tail extends well beyond the tips of the wings when the bird is perched. Okay? There's another group of birds that we'll talk about, the broad-winged hawks that have short tails that don't. But if you see the tail extending like this with bars on it, beyond the wingtips, you know you've got an accipiter. And this accipiter is called the Cooper's hawk, the most common one here in northern Nevada. You need to be able to tell the immatures or the juveniles from the adults. The immatures, two ways to tell. The undersides have got all this brown vertical streaking and yellow eyes. The bird itself is usually brownish all over or grayish all over. Here's another look at two other juveniles. This one is more brownish than the previous one. But again, the long barred tail on both of them. Brown vertical streaks, yellow eye, yellow eye. That's all you need to know to tell it as an immature or a juvenile. Because here's what the adult looks like. In the second year, the eye in the adult starts turning orange and then eventually will become deep red. I'll show you that in a minute. But across the undersides, we don't have vertical streaking. We have what we call horizontal barring, kind of a rufous horizontal bars all the way down onto the legs. The upper sides tend to become more bluish gray on the wings and the back, but just eye color and horizontal barring will tell you it's an adult. There's an even older adult. See how red that eye is? There's the horizontal barring, okay? So all you need to know that that's an adult. These guys are known as ambush birds because they'll often sit in a tree or a bush. They feed on small birds primarily, and they'll wait for a small bird to come by and grab it. And that's why you often see these guys coming around your bird feeders because they're looking for small birds to feed on. So again, Cooper's hawk. Immature bird on the left, brown vertical streaking yellow eye. Adult bird on the right, orangish to red eye, horizontal barring, okay? Cooper's hawk. And then again, even in town, I get a lot of people telling me they have red-tailed hawks in or around their yard. Big bird, 22 inches long, monomorphic except for size. In most hawks, you can't tell male from female, except that females are larger than males. The most common morph or form of the red-tailed hawk we have out here is what we call the light morph. It has this pattern: dark, light, dark. Dark on the head, light on the breast, and then a varying degree of darkness going across the belly, what we call a belly band. So I always tell people, you want to recognize a red-tailed hawk. Well, first of all, you see the red tail. And notice how the red tail doesn't extend much beyond the wingtips. That means this belongs to the so-called broad-winged hawks, or the so-called boodio hawks. So this one is not an acceptor. It's a boodio, a broad-winged hawk. I always tell people, dark, light, dark if you want to know a red-tailed hawk. If you can't see the tail and can't see the color, do this. Dark, light, dark. Dark, light, dark. I always say, repeat it, dark, light, dark. When you go to bed tonight, that's your mantra. Dark, light, dark. Dark, light, dark, okay? When the bird's in the air, if you can see a red tail, no doubt it's a red-tailed hawk. You might even be able to see the dark, light, dark pattern if you get a good enough look at it while it's flying over. But another characteristic that will help you identify red-tailed hawks is this leading edge of the wing. See the dark bar across there? We say the bird has dark leading edges. The red-tailed hawk is the only hawk out west that has dark leading edges. When you use the fancy word, they're called patagial marks, okay? Dark leading edges or patagial marks. So if you see dark leading edges, even if you can't make the dark, light, dark pattern and can't see a red tail, you know you most probably have a red-tailed hawk. But this is also a red-tailed hawk. But there's no red tail. It's a brown tail with bars across it. That's because red-tailed hawks don't have a red tail in their first year. These immatures or juveniles or first-year birds have brown tails with bars on them. So how do I know it's a red-tailed hawk? Dark, light, dark, okay? Your mantra, remember? Dark, light, dark, dark, light, dark. The red-tailed hawk is the most common boodio we have out west, so you've got a better than 90 to 95% chance of being right if you say it's probably a red-tailed hawk. Dark, light, dark, okay? So that's the immature bird. And they like to build nests in cottonwood trees. So if you've got an area in and around your yard where you got a lot of cottonwood trees, you might have a pair building a nest in your yard or somewhere near your yard. I often get people telling me, we had this red-tailed hawk nesting in my neighbor's yard or across the street from us, so on and so on. So be on the lookout for them.